Hello there, and welcome back to this Facebook Live interview all the way from Washington, D.C., a very cold and wintry Washington, D.C., and we have with us the Honorable Senator Deb Peters, all the way from the great state of South Dakota, and NCSL's president. Welcome.
Good morning.
So you brought the snow and everything with you from South Dakota?
Yeah, when I took off, it was actually not snowing, and it was beautiful, 50 degrees.
All right, well, you got to take all this back with you now.
But it's not that cold. It's only the Mississippi perspective.
Oh, Lord. Well, ladies and gentlemen, one thing that Senator Peters is doing in town, as we've talked about several times on the Facebook Live, is the internet sales tax. There, again, is a case before the U.S. Supreme Court right now, with hearings coming up this month. And what's unique about that piece of legislation is Wayfair versus South Dakota is Senator Peters was the author of this legislation from South Dakota. Talk a little bit about what it's been like.
Sure. Well, you know, it's really unique, obviously. It's not the goal of writing a piece of legislation to get to the Supreme Court. Usually you want to write a piece of legislation that is good public policy, that is to not challenge or not create a court case. Writing this particular piece of legislation, the whole goal was to get to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the fact that it happened in less than 2 years is unprecedented. So, yes, writing the piece of legislation to actually trigger a court case. And we passed it with literally only 2 no votes in the entire South Dakota legislature back in 2016. And Senate Bill 106 is a simple bill, very direct at challenging the Quill versus North Dakota court case of 1992. And hopefully next month, April 17th, is our court date in the U.S. Supreme Court. And we will get an overturn of that particular court case back in 92. So.
Wow. And ladies and gentlemen, in this month's edition of State Legislatures Magazine, which is NCSL's publication, there is a great timeline that really talks about the beginning, bringing it up to where we are right now. And it does reference your January 27, 2016 legislation coming in here. The governor signs it March 2016. I mean, basically, we're talking about a fairly new piece of legislation, and it's before the U.S. Supreme Court already.
Yeah. It because South Dakota is a unique state. We don't have the appellate court system. You have the circuit court, and then you have the Supreme Court. And then what they had tried to do, the opposition of our piece of legislation, what they tried to do is get it sent to the federal court. And the federal court said, no, send it. They pulled it back into the state Supreme Court. We hit the South Dakota Supreme Court in September of 2017. So we did the procedural moves. So Senate Bill, I'm going to go back to the timeline. Senate Bill 106 was signed in March, basically 2 years exactly from last week. Signed 2 years ago, went into effect basically 14 days after the governor signed that piece of legislation, and South Dakota sued 4 companies within a day of the enactment of that piece of legislation. Right. So we were in court literally within a month of when the governor signed that piece of legislation. So we've been in court now for just under 2 years, and April 17th is our court date for the U.S. Supreme Court. Right. And less than 2 years from the first action within the state of South Dakota against the 4 companies.
Wow, things are moving. Yeah. And again, Internet sales tax, Marketplace Fairness Act, e-fairness, transparency. I mean, it's been called several different things. Yes. But again, this is the decision of Wayfair versus South Dakota going before the U.S. Supreme Court. Real quick also, you sine-died the South Dakota legislature March the 9th.
That
so
is
you are fresh right out of the legislature.
Yeah.
What would you say were some of the top issues you faced this session?
You know, we started our legislative session with the governor's budget with basically no money. I mean, we had 0 increases for education, 0% increases on Medicaid and providers, and 0 increases for corrections. And you know, we've got high turnover in our state government. We've got high turnover on community support providers. And so we were trying to figure out how to be creative and try to figure out, well, how are we going to balance a budget? So this year we went to work, and the economy helped us out a little bit. Our revenue numbers increased just slightly, but we were able to get 1% for education this year, and we were able to get some of the the direct care providers, so your community-based support providers and the folks that are really taking care of the most needy of individuals in our state, they got a 2% raise, and then our state employees got a 1.4% increase in their salaries. So, with working through a lot of issues, we were able to do some really good things for the folks that really need it the most, and hopefully, even though it's a small drop in the bucket, it'll pay dividends in the end.
Yeah, well, congratulations on the sine die and everything on March the 9th. We have, of course, several sessions, several legislative sessions that are still in currently. We have a great website that actually features a lot of the states, great graphic, everything. More information on our website, ncsl.org. Last but not least, this past weekend, you were in Quebec City, Canada.
Yes.
Talking a little bit about NAFTA at the International Trade Legislative Conference.
Yeah, it was the
Tell me
first
about it.
First annual. So we at the Executive Board for the National Conference of State Legislatures, we were given an opportunity, actually the International Relations Task Force was given a presentation by the Canadian province of Quebec, and they said, hey, we have this idea, what do you think? And they came back with us at the annual summit in Boston and said, we really think that this could happen. What do you think? And they said, we could do this. And the president, Chagnon of the Quebec Assembly, he and his vice president, Ouimet, said, hey, we can do this, we can do this. What do you think about that? And so basically what this conference was a meeting of legislative leaders from Mexico, United States, and all of the provinces of Canada. So it was the three countries that are in effect in NAFTA and the North American Free Trade Agreement, and trying to figure out, because that's a big conversation, and what it means and how business actually is conducted in the United States and Mexico and Canada. So there's a lot of negotiations going on at the federal level talking about, well, what if we did this, or what if we did a tariff on this, or how would we do origin labeling, and a lot of different nuances.
Your state so much. I mean, Canada is the largest trade partner for a lot of our states.
Canada and Mexico are 1 and 2. Wow. So this is a huge conversation to meet with our counterparts that represent similar industries, similar districts across the three countries. And we were able to have speakers from all 3 countries. It was a wonderful opportunity to be able to meet and talk about some of the nuances of the NAFTA negotiations and try to figure out, well, what's best, how can we impact, and how do we get the message to our federal governments, what it means for our states and our provinces. So it was really a wonderful couple of days. It was a hardcore
and I hear you, I was going to say,
days.
I hear you started like at 7 in the morning. You went at 6 or 7 at night.
They worked hard.
Get your money's worth.
Yes, absolutely. They had a speaker about every hour. Very limited breaks, and it was in all different languages. So you had French speakers because we're in Quebec City, so you had the French speakers, you had the Spanish speakers, and so you had wear your headsets because you could be listening to a panel of 5 speakers, and every other speaker is going to be in a different language. Wow. So it was fascinating. We got to really get to listen and learn about all of the nuances, whether it was from the United States perspective, the Mexican perspective, or the Canadian perspective. We got to see what our counterparts are experiencing. I would highly recommend that if we ever do something similar, that we continue those conversations. Just the amount of data that we learned was phenomenal. And to be able to relate to people with the same, I mean, we all have the same issues. Right. Workforce, an educated workforce, and how to bring business into your communities, and then how does it impact us, and where do you send your business, when you ship something, where does it go? Yeah. Fascinating conversations we had last weekend. Yeah.
Lots going on here in Washington, D.C. Again, we have the Honorable Senator Deb Peters, all the way from the great state of South Dakota, and NCSL's president. We've covered everything from internet sales tax. We've talked a little bit about what happened in the South Dakota legislature with the sine die on March the 9th. And then we've talked about NAFTA and International Trade Legislative Conference that was just held in Quebec City. As always, thank you so much for joining us on this Facebook Live interview. And Senator Peters, thank you for being here.
Thank you. You guys have a great day.